Good afternoon. I'd like to call the October meeting of the Community Development, Housing, and General Government Committee to order. Welcome, everyone. We have a number of items on the general agenda. The Minority and Women Business Enterprise Program, a loan forgiveness request, a follow-up on some of the spacing requirements for electronic sweepstakes operation, discussion of the revision to UDA 251, which has to do with special use permits, and a discussion of the potential changes to the cell tower ordinance. But first, it's our practice to take the consent agenda. I have a request from the Human Relations Commission to pull C5 to allow them to address the committee. Are there any other items on the consent agenda that would like to be pulled?
C3A.
C3A, okay.
Do you want to see if any property owners are here?
Yes, I will. Yeah, I think that's the one. Is there anyone here to speak to 416 Bacon Street? Okay. 2109 Waughtown Street, accessory building. 2055 Bowen Boulevard. Okay. And then we have pulled the 2506 Druid Hills Drive. And the staff has asked to pull the 1245 Ivy Avenue piece. So other than that, it looks like we have C3A and C5. Yes, ma'am.
Can we pull C4B so that Councilmember, well, I guess he's not voting. Scratch that.
I'm sorry?
I was just trying to make sure Councilmember Montgomery doesn't vote on that item, but since he's not a member of the committee, you can scratch that.
Okay. All right, thanks.
Move approval of C1, C2, C4, and C6.
Second.
Okay, thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Very good, thank you. Okay, C5. Stephanie, are you going to? Well, okay, go ahead. Yes, come ahead. Since you asked first. If you will give your name and address and your affiliation.
Good afternoon. I'm Nora Baker. My address is 411 Brookridge Court, Winston-Salem 27106, and I am the acting chair of the Human Relations Commission.
My name is Ben Tennille. I live at 844 Glen Echo Trail, and I'm head of the Hearing Review Board for the Human Relations Commission.
Thank you. Welcome.
We have a report this evening for the Human Relations Commission. We have with us the HRC Director, Ms. Wanda Allen Abraha, and her staff member, Jamie Waldeck, as well. I'm pleased to report that during the 2013-2014 fiscal year, the Human Relations Commission maintained a solid, fair housing and landlord-tenant caseload and many community outreach initiatives, including having our 34th annual Human Relations Awards Banquet with a record amount of community sponsorship. We continued with our 9th annual Fair and Affordable Housing Summit in partnership with local and state housing professionals. We also had our annual High School Student Race Relations Forum at Mount Tabor High School. We continued our partnership with the Winston-Salem Police Department on the Community Trust Talk programs. We continued to have our International Village Cultural Festival this year, even without Rock the Block. We still came out and rocked the block, which showcased the community's global cultures. And we continued our partnership with Compassionate Winston-Salem. It is also mentioned that the Human Relations staff provided support to the Human Relations Commission, Youth Advisory Council, and College Advisory Board. we believe that we had a very productive and significant work this year. We are also proud that the National League of Cities recognized our efforts by awarding us with their National Cultural Diversity Award back in March of this year. And now, Mr. Tennille.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm pleased to tell you that the Hearing Review Board did not have to meet during the course of this year, and that's because of the excellent work that the staff of the department did. They processed over 500 housing-relating complaints. They had 75 landlord-tenant complaints were mediated, 12 fair housing complaints were investigated, and 50 fair housing and landlord-tenant trainings were conducted. And I think it's important for you to know that what this staff has done successfully is to diffuse problems before they get big and to solve those problems. And they've done that through a very effective training program and through effective communication with the communities and the people that they work with. And they get the credit for the hearing board not having had to review anything. The staff's also trained city employees in cultural diversity. They formed a new partnership with the Winston-Salem Chronicle to support the Martin Luther King Jr. Annual Breakfast. And significantly, and I think a thing that's going to be important going forward, is that they competed for and won the UNC Chapel Hill Building Integrated Communities Grant, so that they will be working with the immigrant community and trying to assimilate them into this community more effectively. And then, in addition to that, they partnered with Old Salem on the Showcase of Songs to collaborate as a part of Black History Month. Ms. Baker and I will be happy to answer any questions you have, but this staff, as small as it is, has done a tremendous job and a lot of work with very little resources. They're to be congratulated.
Thank you, Mr. Tennille. Are there any questions of either Mr. Tennille or Ms. Baker? Yes, ma'am.
I have a question of the city manager. Thank you again for all that you do for the city, especially during the times that we live in now, when there's so much need. And when there's need, it tends to be sometimes communication gets lost in the transaction of different things that need to happen for citizens in the community. Mr. Garrity, I guess my question is, and I probably know the answer to the first one, do we have a bilingual employee on the human relations staff for the city?
We did, I believe.
Yes, we do.
We still do, yes.
Commission?
On the commission, we do.
But I think, don't we have a staff? We have a staff person, yes.
And do we have a bilingual employee in our community assistance department? Being that the reason I'm asking this is that we have community assistants that work in all of the wards to help the council, but we also know in certain wards our Latino Hispanic communities are growing and they need to have that extra attention to know that we care. And I'm wondering, I know when we send the assistants out, they do a great job, but they don't know Spanish. So I'm wondering, how do we handle that situation? And in the future, we may need to look at that, because how can we say that we're providing every opportunity for all of the citizens to be able to get the services that they need and communicate to us if we don't have someone that's actively working with the community liaisons to get it done? I know the Human Relations does what they do, but I'm concerned on the day-to-day, how do we interact with our Latino Hispanic citizens when there are issues in the community?
You're absolutely correct, Councilmember Adams. It is a continued issue for city government. We do not have as many Hispanic or bilingual employees as we need to serve our citizenry. We do have a policy put in several years ago where we actually pay an incentive to employees if they pass it's basically they have to be not bilingual, but what I would call street fluent, so that they can communicate, but they have to pass a test to do that. But we will continue to work harder to find more Hispanic employees, and I believe I know that this strategic plan that they're going to work on through the grant will bring more of that to light, more needs that we need to make sure that we can reach out to our citizens.
And the great job that we've done so far is public safety and just changing again, we good, but we can be better attitude of how we marketed these positions in public safety, and we're seeing now the benefits of that to our Latino Hispanic citizens. I would like to hopefully that we'll look into that so far as we move forward, even with the budget year coming up. Again, how do we ensure that we are definitely connecting with that part of our community? Because, I understand all of the things we have in place, but if there is not somebody, just like how they pick up the phone and call all of us, that there is somebody that can pick up the phone and call and say, I got a problem, but it's in Spanish. And the person takes it and they understand it. So, thank you. Thank you again for all the work you do.
Yes, thank you very much, and congratulations on the Diversity Award.
Thank you.
That's wonderful, yeah. C3A.
Item C3A, ordinance ordering the Community and Business Development Department of the City of Winston-Salem to remove or demolish structure unfit for human habitation and otherwise to effectuate the purpose of Chapter 10, Article 5 of the Winston-Salem City Code. A. Pamela Jean Wirtz, 2506 Druid Hill Drive.
If we could have our staff give us the background on this.
The property at 2506 Druid Hills Drive was inspected on May 1st of 2014 and found to be in the demolition category in that the cost to repair the structure exceeded 65% of its value. We issued a complaint and notice of hearing, and the hearing was held on June 21st of this year, during which time a repair or demolish order was issued. The order expired, and on September 17th, a notice was sent to the property owners advising them that we would be presenting the case to the committee today. The estimated cost to make the repairs on this structure is $13,265, and the fair market value is estimated at $20,000, making the cost to repair exceed 65% of the dwelling's value. So based on that information, we're recommending that the ordinance be adopted to remove or demolish the structure.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Thank you.
Are there any questions of Stephanie about this, about the,
No.
yeah.
I continue to have questions about where we come up with our numbers. The market value is estimated to be $20,000. That's in as-is condition.
Yes.
And the $16,000 estimate to repair, so if the building was repaired and the $16,000 would be put into it, the market value would be above $20,000, right?
Yeah. Yes.
I mean, I still continue to have difficulty with the amount of houses that we tear down. I mean, I know it's a sort of a sticky wicket, but
Yeah.
this house appears to be savable from the outside. And I also don't understand why some of these reports only deal with exterior conditions, whereas this one does deal with interior conditions.
The first picture is the front of the structure, and the second picture is the rear of the structure.
It looks like there was access, certainly, to the interior. There are lots of unfit findings, repairing the tub fixtures and leaks in the kitchen and so on and so on. But there are no pictures of that.
None of the interior, but we did do an inside inspection on it.
And is that done consistently across buildings, or?
When we have access, yes. When we're able to get inside, yes, we do a complete inspection.
Okay. All right. Thank you. If there are no other questions.
No other
Sorry.
questions. I'd like to hear from the...
Yes. Someone's here to speak on the Druid Hills property. If you'll give your name and address, please.
Yes, Louis S. Wirtz Jr., 619 Marshall Drive, Northeast Leesburg, Virginia. I am the brother of Pamela Jean Wirtz and Petrinia Wirtz of Naha. The property was deeded to us from my father, Reverend L.S. Wirtz, Sr. All of those notices that I heard repeated, I never received any of those notices. And my sister, Petrinia Naha, lives in Lagos, Nigeria since 2003, and she did not receive any of those notices. And unfortunately, my sister, Pamela Wirtz, passed away August of last year. So you may have diligently attempted to contact someone, but I didn't get those notices. I saw the notice on the door because my cousin cuts the grass, and he took a picture and texted it to me. That's why I know to be here today. Mm-hmm. I didn't know any of those other dates. Maybe ignorance of the law is no excuse, but I was not aware of that because I don't live in this area anymore. Anyway, getting to the point of the fact, we plan to bring the house up to the value. We were told the value was more like $26K. That's what we were told, $26,000 instead of $20,000. Mm-hmm. And I know in March, my cousin and I secured the outside, so I don't know how folks got inside the facility and made to make an estimation, because we secured it in March of 14 this year. We understand how the house looks as far as the rest of the neighborhood. I was explaining earlier that I think it's in line with another house close to its age. There are repairs that need to be made to the exterior to bring it to be pristine with the other residences there, and we are prepared to do that. We just need a little extension. We need time to get that accomplished. I have to coordinate with my sister who would be here, but it's tough to get over here, a flight over.
Oh, I got that.
So that's what we would request today, additional time to make those repairs to get it to a point where it could be sold for closer to its market value.
Okay. Are there any questions? Yes.
Question. It's in the North Ward. We've already kind of informally met earlier before
Yes,
the
ma'am.
meeting. And I communicated to Mr. Wirtz that sometimes with us, the ones of us that don't live in the communities where these houses are, our intentions are good, but we don't live in the neighborhoods where a person has to look at it every day. I myself, like I told him, had a situation where there was a house beside me, and I looked at it for 2 years, and that's usually how people get engaged, is I just got sick and tired of it, and I did what most people did. I came to the city and had it torn down. That neighborhood, as I told him, is a neighborhood that I grew up in, Oklahoma Avenue, right around the corner. So I know where he's talking about. And I believe your intentions are good, and I can understand when, from family properties and the way the estates are, that X's name is on it, and when they pass unexpectedly, we're sending notices without knowing that that person either no longer is here with us, and that there are other family members that we can't get in touch with. I believe from my conversation with you earlier that your heart is in the right place. And I think you understand my heart is also in my community because I live here and I'm the representative. I would be willing, committee, to give them an extension, but I would ask you, how long do you think it would take you to fix or repair the findings that need to be done per the city?
I would say a minimum of 12 months.
I don't know about that. What we may look at, Mr. Brooks or Mr. Page, or of how we can address the most, the worst scenarios of the house, Chair Light, and then work from there if possible.
I'd like to
Mac.
ask the owner a question. Have you got a plan on what it will cost to fix this property?
Yes, my sister, when she was attempting to get into a rehab process, so we had to get estimates on, get folks to look at what the deficiencies were and what the estimate would be to repair. So I still have that folder with that information in it.
And not to be too much in your business, but have you got the wherewithal to pull that off?
With my sister and myself and my father, yes.
Do you remember what the dollar figure was roughly, just ballpark?
To get it to a pristine state, but this was when my sister was going to live there. She was disabled, so we wanted to add additional enhancements like guard rails and things like that. It was more like in the $20,000 to $30,000 to do that. That was to get it up to for her to live there, but to get it to where a normal able-bodied person could live, I think it's probably half or less than half of that.
Having done quite a few restorations myself, I would take that number and double it. Something always comes up you don't anticipate.
Okay.
So I would think $15,000 is probably quite low.
Okay.
For that structure.
Yeah.
Then my next question is, once the house is completed, what's the plan then?
To either have my nephew live in the house. He lives in Pennsylvania now. He's finishing up college, so he would move down to live there, or we would rent it.
Thank you very much for your information.
Okay, thank you.
I believe Mr. Brooks has something to ask. Dan, did I miss you? No.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
In response to the question that was asked regarding the time frame, generally on voluntary demolition agreements, our normal time, our average time is about 4 months that will allow for voluntary demolition agreements. The maximum time that I can remember that you all have granted has been 6 months. And in a number of cases, what you have allowed is for a certain period of time to do the exterior, which is generally a short period of time, 60 to 90 days on the exterior. And if you're successful at repairing the exterior to take care of that exterior look for the neighborhood, then you are allowed the remaining time period to complete the project.
Thank you.
Thank you. Would you like to put that in the form of a motion?
I move that we allow the property on Druid Hill Drive, the owner, to have the 90 days or whatever that it takes, Mr. Brooks, again, 90 days to do the exterior.
Yes, 90 days to complete the exterior.
And then how much time after that? Another 3 months?
Yeah.
An additional 3 months.
And an additional 3 months to complete the rehab of the property.
And what I would suggest to the owner, he talked about doing some extra enhancements. I would take care of the code violations that are listed and then concentrate on the enhancements.
Yeah, okay. Do I have a second to?
Second.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So.
Can I ask a question for clarification
ma'am.
purposes? So are you sending it forward with that time frame, or are you holding it in committee for that time frame?
I think
Sending it
send it forward.
What is, Mr. Brooks, what's the precedence? What have we done in the past? Because we have done a number of them like this.
You have done both, but normally you send it on to have the order adopted with that understanding, with that condition, rather.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. All righty. That, I believe, is all on the consent agenda. So we'll move to the general agenda.
Item G1, petition to close and abandon a portion of 9th Street in the East Ward, petition of the City of Winston-Salem.
No.
Public Works.
You ready to go?
I am.
She's ready to go.
I'm sorry. Now, the correct agenda. Item G1, minority Women Business Enterprise Program recommendation.
Yeah, that's, Derrick, I think most of us have heard this, but Dan, you haven't had a chance to.
I can forego
Okay.
the verbal presentation and simply review the notes.
Okay, all right. Well, I think the Finance Committee yesterday accepted the staff's recommendation to attempt to instate some of these bullet points, or all of them, in fact, to keep from having to do, hire a very costly process. So if it's okay with the committee, we will, is this a vote on it kind of thing, or recommendations? Okay. All right, so we're going to just follow this. G2.
Item G2, information on request to forgive loan and free city-owned property on 2nd Street for park development.
Mr. Raleigh.
Yes. Good afternoon, Chairman Light, members of the committee. This item is just for information purposes. I will tell you that several months ago, the city was approached by a collection of nonprofit organizations that sought to preserve a city-owned lot on 2nd Street across from Shady Boulevard as green space and look to convert it to a park, a passive park space. And I'll give you just to get your bearings, some pictures of this particular lot. So this is a picture of the lot that's in question, facing directly as you enter from Shady Boulevard. This is a picture of the property as you face east going downtown, towards downtown on 2nd. And this final picture is a picture of the property facing west towards the baseball stadium from the property. So this group of nonprofit organizations is seeking to preserve this particular lot. Those organizations include the Realtors Association, the Holly Avenue Neighborhood Association, and the Downtown Rotary Club. This group has come together and committed to raise a certain amount of money, $6,000 to $7,000 at last check, towards any effort to convert this space into a passive park. It is a 3/4 acre property. It's comprised of 4 parcels. It's currently undeveloped and has been in this condition for quite some time, several years. There was some interest in the property that kind of fell through. There are lots of easements and certain characteristics of this property that make it difficult for development, private drainage easements, utilities, and so on and so forth. And the property has quite a storied financial history. You can see it laid out there in the memo before you. But the action is to forgive the outstanding debt on this property, to clear it so that it can be converted to a passive park.
Thank you. Are there any questions of Mr. Raleigh? Okay.
I just want to make one clarification, if I could. The Downtown Rotary, their commitment is not 100% solid yet. It had to go before their board, I believe, this month to get that commitment. And they are potentially interested in raising that commitment to a higher level. Okay.
Okay. Thank you. Dan?
I don't need a great deal of detail about the history of the property, but generally speaking, why is the city owed so much money on a vacant property that the city owns?
Absolutely.
To give you some insight into that, I'd asked Mellon, Parker, or I think Derrick might have some knowledge to come and speak, just to give a little information, just to kind of help you understand just generally, because it is quite complex.
It looks like we have a lien on property we own.
Wow.
I'll start and I'll let Mellon jump in there, but this actually, I think, predates probably Mellon, probably me. Richie may have been here, but it's a very old project.
place the blame all around her.
Well, no, there
right.
actually used to be structures on this property. There were two structures, I believe.
Houses.
I think there were two structures on the property.
One of which burned.
And the easement that Mr. Volley referred to, there's a sewer line that runs under them. And as I recall, I think the sewer line collapsed and the buildings that were on the property collapsed. One of the buildings was owned by a partnership for, what was it, the old housing partnership?
Yeah.
Was one of the
Apartments,
buildings.
home ownership.
And then the other was, I think,
AIDS care.
AIDS care service. So there were actually buildings here that when the buildings went away, they actually had operations there. And when the buildings went away, we tried to redevelop the properties. One of the agencies actually went away, which was one of the agencies that we helped establish, which was the Partners for Home Ownership. Actually went away, and we ended up receiving all of the properties and debt that they had incurred because they were actually an organization that had been established by the city. And they probably closed about 4 or 5 years ago. So we sort of inherited the debt, the property back, as well as the challenges with developing this lot. But we had been working with Bill Benton, 10 years or more, trying to get it developed. And he's looked at it several times for development purposes, and gets hot, gets cold.
But that doesn't answer my question. How is it that this piece of property has a $750,000 loan lien on it?
There's a $370,000 or $750,000 property that sat on the building, that sat on the lot, that when the building collapsed, it went away.
Did we loan money to build?
We loaned. They didn't build anything. They were existing structures that were there.
So did we loan money to buy it?
We loaned money to buy the properties, to Partnership for Home Ownership, and to AIDS Care. Correct.
So we loaned money to two entities to buy the property and redevelop it, and it was never redeveloped, and now we own the property.
It was never for redevelopment purposes. They were actually using
the structure
for housing purposes, and they collapsed.
The culvert that runs
The culvert collapsed.
supplies water, was the original water supply to Old Salem. Okay. George Washington.
Slept there in the culvert.
Wooden pipes.
Wooden pipes, that's right.
Sorry. Wait a minute. Okay, yes.
Yeah, so so we already own the property. Basically, are we forgiving a lien to ourselves? Is that the bottom line? Okay.
We would not be trying to pursue, I think the request is for us not to pursue development of the land and to sell it, because that was the other option that we had on the table. There was actually a request from Bill Benton to purchase and pay off some portion of the lien. So at this point, we'll be basically forgiving all of the debt to create a passive park.
Could we, without forgiving the debt, I'm just asking for purpose of understanding, could we expunge the lien in some fashion without erasing the debt that may be owed to us?
I'll have to go back and look at the documents. I kind of doubt. I mean, one organization has basically been dissolved, so I have to see what the documents say.
And I'm not asking for a discussion of the merits of whether or not we should attempt to pursue any of it. Just kind of a question of whether it would be legally possible. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I'm with Councilmember Bessie on this one. I guess, Mr. Garrity, I would be asking where in the budget, and you can get that to us before Monday. I need to know where in the budget this is reflected, and are we carrying this kind of, on our books, or?
It's not. This is for information this first month because I knew this was going to be a multi.
I know, but where I'm like Councilmember Bessie, where does it show up at? And do we have any other properties like this or examples of this? And I'd like that too.
Okay.
And Councilman Montgomery just whispered something to me. When all of this was happening, I mean, the fire and whatever, the collapse, did any of these people have insurance or anything that we could have gotten anything, or we just, on the good grace of the city and a handshake agreement, it just happened and they just walked away from their debt and what they owe the citizens of Winston-Salem?
All the actions came to council over the time, so nothing was done by a handshake, but we can get you a detailed report because it's as Mr. Page said, it's many years of transactions involving the nonprofits, several attempts to redevelop it for housing. There was some starts and stops with Sika and others trying to design the housing that would work for that area. So,
and it would be great for us to have some history on it, just like you said, because I'm just, I don't know.
In fact, I was on the board of the Partners for Home Ownership.
So you're to blame.
It's my fault, yeah.
did you personally sign?
But as I say, that was a city committee or board, and when the funders collaborative did not fund it any longer, it folded, and so it landed in the city's lap. So, at any rate, someone can maybe try to put it
We'll try
together.
to, and then there's all the transactions involving AIDS care services. So,
Yeah.
So we'll try to
Okay.
go through the history for you.
Mr. McIntosh.
My history probably goes back further than anybody in the room, maybe with the exception of Richie, but this during the period of time I was involved as neighborhood association president and sort of watched the machinations go on. And my question is it real money that we're talking about? We owe money to ourselves. Is there really a line item, a budget line item that makes this real money? And the other thing is that, just as an aside, there are two pieces of property. There's this one big section, and then across the street there's a corner lot that I think it would be very saleable to recoup some of this.
Mm-hmm.
And just as another aside, my wife and I did bought a house from the city of Winston-Salem and moved it off the site over on the Shady Boulevard a number of years ago. So we go way back. It's a very tangled story.
Yes.
Yeah, I'll see if there is actually a lien. I mean, the debt is to ourselves. I mean, the biggest impact, if council chooses to do this, is, we are we won't have any repayments to the Housing Finance Assistance Fund because that's where the obligation is owed to. So, if we were to sell the property for a market rate or even some sub-market rate, those proceeds would go back into the Housing Finance Assistance Fund. We don't. That asset or that outstanding hopeful asset goes away for the fund.
This is for information only, so we'll wait and get some more of the story later. Okay, thank you, Evan. Certainly before your time.
Before he was born.
I know, before he was born. That's right. Okay, all right. G3.
Item G3, follow-up report addressing spacing requirements for electronic sweepstakes operations.
All right, thank you. This is another informational item. At your July 15th meeting, came before you and presented a report examining the 25 largest municipalities in North Carolina and how and if their ordinances address electronic sweepstakes operations. That report, which is included in this packet, showed that of those 25, 10 municipalities regulated electronic sweepstakes operations as a specific use. The spacing regulations, of those 25, the 10 that regulate electronic sweepstakes operations, 9 of those 10 have spacing requirements, us being the only exception. Those spacing regulations for electronic sweepstakes operations vary from a low of 200 feet to a high of 2,600 and 40 feet or a half mile. They're generally between other electronic sweepstakes operations and also from residential districts, residential uses, churches, schools, daycare centers, and parks and recreation facilities. Again, see the chart that's included for those particulars and related to that July report. But at your July meeting, you also requested the following additional information. You wanted us to contact the 9 other municipalities that have electronic sweepstakes operations to determine the rationale behind their spacing requirements, the effectiveness of those spacing requirements, how many electronic sweepstakes operations currently operate in their jurisdiction, and how many have been permitted since the adoption of their ordinance. Additionally, you wanted to know locally, are any of the existing electronic sweepstakes operations in Winston-Salem currently in a certified redevelopment area? And finally, you asked the Attorney's Office to provide some crime statistics and report for properties in the vicinity of the electronic sweepstakes operations in Winston-Salem. So I'll handle the first 2, and I'll turn the last item over to the Attorney's Office. To address the first question, or the first set of questions, staff sent an email to the planning staffs of Concord, Fayetteville, Gastonia, Greenville, Hickory, Huntersville, Rocky Mount, Wilmington, and Wilson. Those were the jurisdictions that had regulations. The specific answers for each of those jurisdictions is included in a table included in your packet. And we did receive no written response from Fayetteville and Greenville. Of the 7 jurisdictions that responded, only 2 currently have electronic sweepstakes operations within their jurisdiction. That's Concord, which has 12, and Wilson, which has 5. All 7 responding jurisdictions indicated that they included spacing requirements in their regulations to prevent concentration in one area and to minimize impacts to incompatible uses such as schools, churches, and residences. Since the majority of the jurisdictions surveyed do not have electronic sweepstakes operations, however, the effectiveness of the spacing regulations is largely unknown. Concord indicated it was still too early to determine the effectiveness of their regulations, especially in light of the fact that they actually went back and amended their ordinance to remove the spacing limitation between electronic sweepstakes operations and residential uses. Wilson indicated that their sweepstakes spacing regulations have been effective in limiting the overall number of electronic sweepstakes operations in their jurisdiction. I guess they've kind of, where they're located, they've kind of spaced a lot of new ones out of their jurisdiction. Staff decided to ask another follow-up question, so we asked each jurisdiction if they consider electronic sweepstakes operations legal use, a legal use, and thus can issue permits for them. Gastonia, Hickory, Rocky Mount, and Wilmington all consider electronic sweepstakes operations illegal and will not issue permits for those uses, for the use. Again, we didn't receive anything back from Fayetteville and Greenville. We did have a verbal confirmation from Greenville that they consider them illegal and will not issue permits for that use. Moving on to the second item that staff, that planning and development services staff investigated was whether or not any of the current electronic sweepstakes operations are located in certified redevelopment areas. And our GIS planning staff mapped the certified redevelopment areas and overlaid the locations of all known and permitted electronic sweepstakes operations in the city, and that revealed that none of them are located within a certified redevelopment area. That concludes my portion of the report, and I'll turn to Angela or Jerry and whether or not they have any information related to crime data, and then I'll come back and conclude.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Jerry. Okay.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I'm going to speak with regard to impacts of the sweepstakes locations on crime. We performed an analysis of crime reports dating back from 2009 to 2013, looking at crime reports prior to the establishment of an electronic sweepstakes operation, comparing it after. Our findings are that any correlation between sweepstakes operations and increased crime, if any, appear to be minimal. And so that was the conclusion upon our analysis of the crime reports.
Thank you, Jerry. Are there any questions of Mr. Contos or Mr. Murphy? Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Thank you. So what you're saying is, I guess what I was looking for was some type of matrix that tells me these sweepstakes places in our community that we get no police calls to these places at all. Is that what you're telling me?
No, I'm not telling you that there are no police calls. Oftentimes, especially with shopping centers, when we do see the call reports, it's very difficult to pinpoint which specific business the call is coming from. You'll just get the general address for the area. What my analysis involved was just basically looking at the raw numbers in some instances for the entire center, if it was impossible to glean, okay, that came from this specific unit in the center. In some instances, it was clear, okay, there were this many calls for this unit versus this many for this unit later when it did become a sweepstakes operation. And again, I wasn't able to, I'll preface it by saying I'm not a statistician, but I wasn't able to glean any type of a correlation, any increase. In some situations or actually decrease. And again, it varied by location, but generally speaking, I wasn't able to come to a conclusion that crime increases as a result of a sweepstakes operation.
And I hear you, but I guess where my mind goes in is I know that the Winston-Salem Police Department, they can glean that type of information. Am I correct, attorney?
In some instances they can, and they did pull some incident reports so we could determine whether or not it was at the sweepstakes location or at another unit within the shopping center. It's just you couldn't take that information and say it is that sweepstakes operation that resulted in the increase in crime. Is there reports or calls to various units in the shopping center other than just the sweepstakes?
And I understand that, but it's just like if I was the police are coming to my house and my Councilmember Light lives beside me and she's having these wild parties that's causing issues for me, then the police can tell me how many times they've been to her house. All I'm asking for, and it's maybe just me, I just need to see what calls specifically, and the police got this, are going to these sweepstakes places. And probably maybe you're right, but I believe in, falling on the side of being proactive on this, because if they are good citizens and nothing's happening at their establishment and then something happens, I would rather we be able to tell the citizens of Winston-Salem that we looked at the detailed data, because we do have establishments, as Mr. Garrity knows, in some of our communities that they were getting calls all along until something happens that causes hurt or injury to a citizen. And so I'm just that's the date I'm asking for. Thank you.
Very good. Councilmember Montgomery.
I know that it was stated in reference that there were none located in certified redevelopment areas. Now, help define for me the portion of the certified redevelopment areas.
Yeah.
And at what time? Because that's, if I remember correctly, that's something that has some age on it in terms of those areas being defined as certified redevelopment areas, correct?
I did not bring the map with me. It's my understanding what we did is that was one of the questions that came up, how are we saying what's a certified redevelopment area? It did not include areas that I believe are eligible for housing assistance and like lower level kind of things. It was things that where there had been an adopted redevelopment plan and that it was still going under active redevelopment. So it didn't go back to the 1960s or, it's anything that's still considered active today.
Because I think that if you looked at the NRSA, that would paint a totally different picture than looking at the certified redevelopment area.
Right. Certified redevelopment areas are very small, specific areas where the city does major redevelopment, acquiring properties, so by their nature, these are very expensive things, and so there's not that many of them, and they're not very large where they are.
It'd be interesting. I wasn't at the discussion when the committee did this last time, but particularly the NRSA to me is an area which we specifically say and attempt to put dollars into those areas because we understand the economic impact that could potentially have there. And so I think looking not at the certified redevelopment areas and more so at the NRSA gives a better picture of looking at, are these sweepstakes located in our more underprivileged neighborhoods and communities, which I think that will show a much different picture than specifically the certified redevelopment area.
And I don't find which jurisdiction it was, but that specifically came out of one of the jurisdictions does prohibit them within certified redevelopment areas, but I don't see, or maybe because maybe that one of them did not do that, but they do have them in certain overlays, Gateway Corridor overlay. There's some historic districts, some other things. So the question was asked, can we look and see if there are any currently in a certified redevelopment area, which is why we looked at the larger term certified redevelopment area. I only looked at those specific smaller sites.
Are you asking that we look at the larger area?
Yeah. It sounds like that would be very good. Jeff, and then Dan.
I'm curious as to why some municipalities consider this to be illegal and some consider it to be legal. Is there not case law to...
I'll try to answer that. The case law is not clear. There was a Supreme Court decision in 2012, and what happened, and it happens each and every time there's a decision, once there is a decision, the industry changes the software. So now we have the pre-reveal software that came about as a result of the 2012 decision. And so you have some courts that have looked at the pre-reveal software and said it's legal, and then you have some jurisdictions where the courts have said it's not legal. And here, in consultation with the DA's office, we determined that the pre-reveal software is legal. So until we get a Supreme Court decision on the pre-reveal software that came about as a result of the last decision, that's why you have people doing different things.
And if I may note, it's even different within what we regulate. The county attorney's office has actually said that we are not to issue any.
And they've said that despite the fact they haven't had any communication from the DA's office. But.
Right. I'm just letting you know it's different even with what we have, what we're dealing with. We, like I said, we've specifically been told not to issue any in the county's zoning jurisdiction.
And so are municipalities that say it's not legal, are they being sued?
Some are being sued, and some of the courts have said in some of those locations they've issued injunctions prohibiting them from trying to close those establishments. And in some cases, the courts have agreed with the city. So again, you have different decisions in different places. So until we take, or a municipality or a company takes that decision up to the Court of Appeals and forward, it's just kind of all over the place. And you do it based upon the discussions with the DA's office. The municipalities talk to the DA's office, try to come to consensus as to whether or not they're legal or illegal.
Do we know if there's been any challenges to the spacing requirements?
I'm not aware of any challenges to the spacing requirements. The last challenge that I'm aware of related to the amount of the privilege license tax, and that was in Fayetteville, and they were charging, I think it was $2,500 per location and maybe $2,500 per machine. And
that's a moot point now, though, right?
Yeah. Well, it will be next year.
Yeah, it will be.
So if we came up with a nice round number, say 5,280 feet between each location, 1 mile, that might serve our purposes.
Well,
just throwing it.
I think you would want to look at it in terms of other spacing requirements you might have in the UDO, but it may. But we can talk about it.
Okay. All right. Any other questions? Yes, Dan.
Actually, Jeff asked the question I was going to pursue about whether any of the other cities that say we're not issuing licenses, period, had been successfully sued, and I gather it's still out there.
It's out there.
Okay. I was going to follow up on the line of inquiry about crime data. I think we may have been too obscure in the question, and certainly I wouldn't presume to ask Attorney Contos for a statistical analysis of correlation in the area, but perhaps two different sets of data, specifically those police service calls that can be specifically identified to the sweepstakes establishment, and separately those police service calls that are attributed to the shopping area in which the sweepstakes operation is located, and we cannot definitively say are not associated. So we can get a range saying for location X, the number of police calls associated with them within the past year is somewhere between 15 and 85, depending on how many of these indeterminates were associated. So,
and if I may add to that, that still does not answer the question of what about the residential areas and whatever around those shopping centers that have the sweepstakes. And I don't know that there would be any real way to capture that. But
for that, we would have to get a statistical analysis of correlations data and do a radius and have somebody who was, unlike us, mathematically trained, or an actuary or somebody.
Yeah.
In who.
Okay. Well, if we can get that information, we also, unless there are other questions, we also have a couple of people who would like to speak to us about the electronic sweepstakes. The first being Joycelyn Johnson.
Good evening, committee and other members. There are a number of concerns, in particular on the residential level, as to what these operations will do for the communities. While some of them are within shopping centers, some of them, when you look at what is truly a highway business, there are areas where some of these centers are currently located, those that are also currently asking for permission to be in those communities, that have essentially community collector streets. When I consider the 311 piece where there is a pending request now, primarily, it's Highway 311. It's been 311, I know, for 60 years. But it's also the major collector for a number of communities there. As you do your concerns and consider some things, signage for those areas needs to be in a permanent or fixed position and not in a floating, non-standable position. I know there's one of the requests that's currently asking for a free-floating sign to be placed there. The other major concern is what is the net benefit to the social economic development of these communities? Does it help? Are those where, and I know the definition when it comes to talk about highway business, you think about the traffic, but look at the communities that are surrounded there. I ask that you not take any action on any of the two pending, and I know that there are at least two pending requests now until you make some decisions about the zoning request, and at some point in time we have some increased community dialogue regarding these concerns. The other, as we talked about the certified areas, but look at those communities and whether they're NRSA areas or those areas that are nearby that may be economically fragile communities that we are trying to infuse quality businesses into and not something that will continue to take money from those communities. Thank you.
Thanks, Joycelyn. Any questions? Carolyn Highsmith.
Hey there, I'm Carolyn Highsmith, 3335 Anderson Drive. I'm representing the New South Community Coalition today in South Winston-Salem. Sweepstakes has been a major issue with us since 2012. I'll address the crime issue first. Molly Light knows we had a huge community meeting in 2012 due to the increase in crime at South Park Shopping Center, due to the fact we had 3 sweepstakes operations ongoing at that time in the shopping center. One of those operations, AIA, which was in the middle of the shopping center, was attracting the most crime. And what we are seeing with sweepstakes is when you have an overconcentration of them like that, you are attracting not only patrons who are going to the sweepstakes, but also people who know that these establishments stay open, especially the AIA, 24 hours a day. So these the patrons become targets then for crime. So what we were seeing in South Winston-Salem in 2012 was prostitution, drug arrests in the shopping center area, patrons being attacked, employees being attacked, mugged, assaults, robberies, that sort of thing. It took the District 3 police commander at that time, along with intervention of the New South Community Coalition, the neighborhoods around South Park Shopping Center, to get this under control. Now, we have been able to keep it under control because we are now aware of the situation. We also made the shopping center have better security. We made AIA get a security guard from 11 p.m. to morning. So, but it took all of that effort because of those the concentration of the sweepstakes in the shopping center to get that going. Since then, one of those sweepstakes has gone out of business, and now we have a zoning case trying to get back in. That goes, so before I go into a concentration issue, one of the things about crime is that in 2010, the Governor's Crime Commission on sweepstakes, they did a study all over the state that says the existence of criminal and illegal behaviors at or near internet sweepstakes cafes is documented across the state. So you're going to attract that type of behavior. Not so much that you're having people in the sweepstakes operations doing criminal activity, but you're attracting that type of element. Then in South Winston-Salem, the biggest issue that we are having is because with the city ordinance now only regulating sweepstakes for highway business, you would now have quarters of highway business. And one of those quarters that's becoming a sweepstakes quarter is Peters Creek Parkway. We have 4 already on that street, one beginning at 2101 Peters Creek Parkway, one in the middle of Marketplace Shopping Center, and then 2 at South Park Shopping Center, and a 3rd is trying to come in. We have another 2 to 3 in the surrounding areas, so that's 8 in South Winston-Salem. That and it represents over 30% of the entire sweepstakes operations of the city. So that is not the type of business and economic development we want for our city. I mean, we can live with some sweepstakes, but not this overconcentration. Not only in our business areas, but in our neighborhood areas, because we have a sweepstakes operation in Washington Park and one in at Conneaut Hills. So that gets to concentration. And the New South Community Coalition has been studying this, and we really advocate for the City Council to implement separation standards for sweepstakes in this city to regulate the control of overconcentration of sweepstakes in any one area. Last night we had a meeting, and we agreed that we would like to recommend to the City Council a regulation of 1,000 feet between electronic sweepstakes operations and between residential areas, churches, schools, daycare centers. That was sort of a midway separation standard in all the ones that have separation standards. Not too low, not too high. It would definitely, for example, probably keep only 1 sweepstakes at the shopping center at South Park Shopping Center. But because of churches further down at Walmart, it would keep sweepstakes from going into those areas. It would probably eliminate the one at Conneaut Hills. And that's another thing about the highway business. I want to make y'all realize that highway business, because the city has annexed to the county, you now have neighborhood developments abutting highway business. So that's why you're going to have residential areas impacted by sweepstakes.
Okay.
And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Carolyn. That's, okay, committee, what would you suggest that, we've got several things that we've asked the staff to come back to us with. Yeah.
I had just a couple of observations. Of course, the sweepstakes operation in Washington Park is a legal non-conforming use until the amortization period runs, and then it will have to close or relocate, but it can't continue operating in that facility. I suspect the same is true of the one in Conoke Hills, although I haven't checked out the zoning for that. Yeah. Yeah. The naturally, I would have to observe that our limiting sweepstakes operations to HB zones was not an invitation for additional operations, but simply saying you can't have it in other zones. And it would be of interest, although I don't know if this data is available, how many of the ones that have opened up in those locations have moved from other zoning areas within the city or county. I would be interested in whether the city has the authority to regulate hours of operation for the facilities. Because I'm just inherently, ones that are open 24 hours a day are likely to have a larger impact than ones with more. This is true for any business that is going to attract a customer base in the middle of the night. And just anecdotally, I'll note that the one that recently opened at the entrance to Marketplace Mall, it used to be a buffet restaurant, and I happened to pass it within the last couple of evenings, maybe last night. In the last couple of evenings, at about 9:30 or quarter to 10, the lot was full and the light was on in the window. That it was a 24-hour operation. So I suspect that its customer base does in fact continue deep into the evening and have an additional impact. So I'm pleased in retrospect that we limited the operations to highway business. I'd be interested to know whether there are other appropriate restrictions that we could make a legal case for, such as the hours of operation.
Yes, thank you. I agree with Councilmember Bessie. I'd like to see, again, the information brought back. And, again, this is a process. This is something that we're not going to just, as we all know, rush into. We probably need more information, such as the crime statistics of, as you said, the radius around those areas, because we see that when the city manager and staff brought us the map, it showed us the hot areas for crime in our neighborhoods. So I'm sure we can get that information along with the calls that are going to the centers and the calls that are going to the specific location of a sweepstakes. I'd also like to have, as Councilmember McIntosh brought up, I'd like to see those, how many, again, sweepstakes do we have now versus when they came on the scene and started to grow in Winston-Salem and in the county. I'd also like to know, as we said, which ones are operating legally right now, but really, as Councilmember Bessie said, that are destined to become illegal in a moment, because we gotta know that they're going to move somewhere. Right. I'd also like to see us do something with the regulation of time, because I feel like if we regulate alcohol, why wouldn't we regulate gambling? And if we do it and we, the state, I don't know, Attorney Carmen, whether the league is going to bring the sweepstakes back or whether you think the legislature is going to address sweepstakes again in the upcoming year.
It's always possible.
Yeah, I think we need to go ahead and be proactive to show our citizens that, if you can't buy alcohol all night, every day, why should you be able to go do gambling all night, all day? Because we're asking for some other issues to come out of that. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. And one thing, just a correction, certainly even if we do institute spacing requirements, existing sweepstakes businesses will be grandfathered. So it's not going to make anything go away, but it certainly would keep others from opening up. Mr. Montgomery.
To Councilmember Adams' point before she mentioned alcohol, I'd written ABC down because I think the conversation about sweepstakes is similar to the type of conversation that we have in community around alcohol sales in terms of where, when, how, should it even be something that we even allow to happen in certain areas. Just a step backwards, when we were first discussing the portion in reference to the sweepstakes, the position I took in reference to where we were with the fees and where they're located was something that I supported that way because it was something being allowed, and we were able to see the benefit of those dollars from the franchise fees coming back into some of those areas. With that being taken away, it really, to me, it's hard for me to see the larger benefit. But when we look at where we allow them to go, I think if that's where we allow them to go, then that's where they should go in those areas. But then looking at how does that affect the surrounding pieces. Right. I know that Ms. Highsmith mentioned something about the 1,000 feet. If we're looking at space, and I'd be looking I would want something a little wider than 1,000 feet, just in the sense that, sometimes there may be other shopping centers, not the same shopping center, but close to one another, that may get over that 1,000 feet, but still doesn't get to the point that what we want to achieve is limit the numbers that are in certain areas. But then coming back to the ABC portion, I would like to see what our regulations are around ABC stores. And I know on those we can regulate certain things, and the ABC board has certain things that they do with the timing and those things. And I don't know what time the ABC store closes.
Well, stores are different.
But most of that's regulated by the state, but we can get that information.
Well, I know what I'm saying, but there are certain standards that have been set in place in terms of where they can be placed, the hours of operation, and those kind of things. Right. And as I said, I think the communal conversation around these are the same type of conversation that we've had, and so the type of things we do, I think, could be very much similar to those.
Thank you. Okay. Shall we hold this in committee then until we get the information we have asked for?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
all right. Yes,
question.
ma'am.
If we look at a spacing requirement, do you want us to look at the possibility of an amortization schedule like we did for highway business, moving them to highway business?
Yes.
That would be good.
Exactly.
Yes. And certainly, I was trying to do some math about, who was it that suggested a mile between? Yeah, well, certainly a half mile might be, 1,500 feet or something like that. So, at any rate, we'll come back to that. Okay. All righty.
We got
Yeah, we'll see.
We'll hold this in committee. Thanks to all of you.
I have one more question.
Yeah.
Yes, Attorney Carmen and Mr. Garrity, could we, I know this is far-fetched, we couldn't put a moratorium on people, I know we got some pending zoning, but could we do that until we get this deal done? Because I don't want, I mean, even in my ward, I'm seeing in this community shopping centers that are across the street, you pass there one day, you see one. Now I got 2 or 3 right across the street from each other. And it seems like we're seeing this fast click to get these sweepstakes parlors open. And I'm just, can we? No?
I can look at what the statute says
in terms
of the moratorium. I know
Thanks.
there's certain things that have to be done before you put one into place. I can
Okay.
do that. Yeah. And then I guess in terms of the cases that you do have pending, there's always the possibility of continuing those. But I'll look at the moratorium.
Thank you.
Yeah, because a moratorium requires public hearings and all of that sort of thing. So,
And it wouldn't impact the ones that are already filed. It would have to be going forward from after you have that public hearing and set that date.
So, in fact, maybe just allowing it to be known that anything that comes before us, before this is settled, is going to get turned down. So,
Continue.
Yeah. Okay. But you can only continue something so long.
No, that's more in the before the planning board.
Oh, okay. We can just, each one of us could continue. Okay, all right, okay.
Well,
All righty.
I would just note, and would ask our attorney to correct us if I'm wrong, I mean, these are quasi-legislative decisions, and we can conclude that it's not an appropriate use for an area and simply turn down the request.
Well, that's
It's
what I
legislative,
think.
that's true. But even legislative decisions cannot be arbitrary or capricious, but it is legislative.
Well, we have to have a rational land use based conclusion, and those are readily drawn based on evidence that's available in the case, I would suggest.
Okay. All righty, thank you. Next one.
Item G4, discussion of revision to UDO 251 regarding verified motion option for special use permits.
Oh, okay.
Good evening, council members. I'll just briefly introduce this and then turn it over to Attorney Carmen to bring you up to date on what specifically she put together for you on what you asked last time. But UDO 251 basically changes the planning board role in elected body special use permit processes. It changes it to one of the planning board's role simply taking action on the site plan, being a site plan review agency, and not continuing to perform its function of having a public hearing and making its own separate findings of fact and then making a recommendation to the council. And in looking at that, particularly since we've been having more special use permit processes, that appeared, as we were looking at with the attorney's office, to be a fairly messy process, particularly getting the planning board intertwined in public hearings, findings of fact, making recommendations to something that you all are dealing with as a quasi-judicial process with very big restrictions on ex parte communication and sworn testimony and things like that. So information was coming to you from the planning board that was outside of that realm. So that was the rationale for changing the ordinance to take the planning board out of that role and just simply make them a site plan review entity for the purpose of these kinds of approvals. As you discussed that back in August, I didn't hear any concern about that change, but the concern that committee members had was seeing if you could retain a way of getting stakeholder, affected party feedback to you before the public hearing. And so that's what the city attorney has looked at, and she has a recommendation for you that if you wish to provide a process for allowing that for that, she has a recommendation there that can be incorporated into this text amendment. And I'll turn it over to her to explain.
And basically, if you look at page 11, it's 11, and then turn over to page 16, you'll see, in essence, the verified motion process, which is a process that allows opponents and proponents of the requested special use permit to file a motion 7 days before the actual permit request is being considered by council. And in that motion, the person can state, basically under oath, their reasons for supporting or objecting to the requested special use permit. And in that motion, the individual would also establish the basis for their having standing to file that verified motion. So hopefully this will give council a forecast of what the issues might be in terms of that requested special use permit. And then if it's filed within that 7-day time period, it'll be included in your agenda package so everybody will see it ahead of time. And if it's not filed before that 7-day time period is up, then they can bring it with them to the actual hearing. And then at that point in time, that you can submit it there or testify, probably just simply testify. But we're going to try to encourage them to submit it ahead of time so it's in the book and everybody can see it.
Okay. Questions for the attorney or for Mr. Norby? Yes, sir.
I've got written in my notes, this makes my head hurt. Can I ask Paul to give me a run-through on a case, the way it would happen now versus the suggested recommendation?
It would get, the process right now works similar to the time frame and the steps like a rezoning. So petitioner comes in and puts in an application. It gets reviewed by the staff. Letters get sent out for the planning board hearing. A sign gets posted. The planning board has a public hearing at which, and it's not a quasi-judicial hearing since it's the planning board, and the planning board's not the final decision-making authority. So it's a regular public hearing. The planning board has the site plan in front of them, but then there's also this set of findings, I believe there's 7 of them that are in the UDO for the planning board to make. And so they make those findings and make a recommendation. Then the staff report is completed with their input, and it's brought forward to the council then for the special use permit public hearing. So what we do in those staff reports is we repeat a summary of what people said at the planning board public hearing, which when you really look at it, that's not sworn testimony.
Absolutely.
And that's coming to you. The benefit I think I heard you all say is that at least that gave you a preview of what the issues were. So the question is, how can you do that in a legally defensible way?
Yeah.
And so Attorney Carmen provided that recommendation. So what we're talking about changing it to is the planning board would not have a public hearing. It would simply be called a planning board review, which is the term we use for a site plan review. And then if the planning board certifies that it meets the requirements of the UDO, then that comes forward with the package of everything else to the city council for the special use permit hearing.
And a set of stipulations about how that other information that we want to hear prior to it coming to council, there's a set of regulations about how that can be presented to us.
That's
it has
right.
to be turned in.
That's right.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm
Thank
good. I was just going to say I'm good. This is good.
Do I have a motion? Or is this just for?
It's ready to go forward now. It was only held to come up with a process that would allow for input by citizens in support of or opposed to it, the requested special use permit, and so we inserted the verified motion process. So if you all are okay with that, it's ready to go forward now to council.
Okay.
So we would probably need to schedule that for an upcoming zoning public hearing for you since it's a UDO amendment, and you haven't had a public hearing yet.
So
Do that again? Wait.
So in other words, if you, it hasn't come to you, to the council yet for public hearing. So what we need to do is schedule an advertise it for a public hearing, probably along with your other zoning-related items that come to you the first meeting of the month.
Okay, so if.
But I was wondering, given the fact that it's the 21st, is it too late for the 3rd?
For the 3rd, yes.
Okay.
So we might have to make it for
It'll have
December.
to be December?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. But in effect, we still can recommend to the full council. Okay.
Right.
May I have a, huh?
You need a motion to recommend the full council?
Yeah.
I'll move that we recommend the proposal with the amendment and that it be set and advertised for public hearing in the first meeting.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Very good. Thank you. All right.
Item G5, discussion of potential transmission tower ordinance modification.
Hi, Kirk.
Good afternoon, Chairman Light and members of the committee.
Good afternoon.
As you all remember, a couple months ago, we presented UDO 250 to you all in committee, which was a text amendment that modified recently adopted transmission tower standards. And the committee reviewed that text amendment, recognized that on its own was some good changes to what had been previously adopted, and you moved that forward to the full council, which adopted it in September. At the same time, you all discussed other potential ordinance modifications that you wanted staff to go back and research and draft some ordinance language. So that's what I'm going to discuss today. So in brief, what staff did was we prepared ordinance language that we put in your booklets that would do a couple of things. It would reduce the maximum height of residential towers from 199 to 150 feet, and that was based on the fact that you all noted that the towers being approved since the ordinance was adopted were all around that height, and you felt that was an appropriate height limit for residential towers. And also placing greater limits on when monopole and monopine towers would be allowed in residential areas, with unipoles, what's also known as the slick sticks or the flagless flagpoles, being the preferred tower type in all situations. And I'll discuss that in a little more detail. So first of all, only unipole or monopine, the faux pine trees, towers would be allowed in tree stands where the majority of the trees are evergreen. And that regulation came about because you all had concerns that some folks were doing monopine trees in areas that lose their leaves, and suddenly you have a situation where a tree that blends in during the summer stands out as a fake cell tower in the winter. So that's where that language came from. Also, we further explained that unipoles are preferred in such locations, and monopines would only be allowed where the petitioners demonstrate that the tower would be compatible with the area. So again, the default is the unipole or the flagless flagpole. On the other end of the continuum, only unipoles or monopole towers, those towers that are basically a steel or aluminum pole with an antenna array on top, would be allowed in tree stands that are primarily deciduous. And again, that's because you all had concerns that in the wintertime, if all the leaves are on the ground, suddenly the tower sticks out. And there's a similar provision that in such tree stands, the monopoles would only be allowed where the petitioner could demonstrate to you all, through their findings of fact, that there would be compatibility with the area. Council also requested staff to develop a method for determining which type of tower the citizens would prefer in their neighborhood, and Attorney Carmen and her staff had some legal concerns about that. They've drafted a memo addressing those concerns and distributed that to you as well, and I'll allow her to expound on that if she wishes. But to wrap up my end of things, if the council does wish to move forward with a formal ordinance adoption process of these changes, we can go ahead and initiate that process for you all. It would obviously have to go back through the planning board, public notification process, stakeholder involvement, and finally coming back to council for review. So if you all decided to move forward with that today, the earliest it could get to the planning board would be in December. So then going back to council in 2015.
Okay. Question. Does anybody have a question of Kirk? I do. Where proposed towers with concealed antenna are not located within an existing stand of trees, monopine towers shall be prohibited. I would suggest that it needs to be not only the monopine out in the middle of an empty field, but also the monopole with all the arrays
sticking out of it. Yeah.
So I wonder if the committee agrees that maybe that's a change that we could consider. The other okay, I mean, there's an out with having monopoles in areas that have deciduous trees because, I mean, they're going to stick out even when the trees are in leaf, but certainly will stick out when all the leaves fall. So I know we've said in all of these that these points that the unipoles are preferred, but I wonder what the committee thinks about monopoles being prohibited.
My only concern with that is that the efficiency of the slick sticks is significantly less. So are we going to end up with more poles, regardless of the
Yeah,
the
but they'll be
type.
pretty poles.
Well, I'm sure pretty,
But they won't work.
sure pretty states it, but.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we're going to end up with more requests, more neighbors upset that there's a pole going up close to them. I don't have any scientific basis for that, but that's my guess.
Chair, again, I know this is a process, and we've been working through it, and I'm very proud of where we are now, along with staff. But to Councilmember McIntosh's point, I think at some point, we got to just go with it and see where it takes us, and then if we need to pull it back, we can do that. But I think, to now go from where we weren't even this close the last few months to get this close, and we still want to, I understand editing and revising, but I think we need to go with what we have, the staff has worked on, and make the changes to, which number is that? Oops. The one that you said in A on page 40, IA, to add the other,
To add monopole.
the monopole, but I'm in agreement that we move forward and make that change.
Okay.
Can I
Yeah.
ask you a quick question? Can you turn to page 42 and look at this 3I?
Which one?
See if that addresses your issue. It says monopole towers may only be allowed in residential districts where such towers will be located within an existing stand of trees comprised of greater than 50% deciduous trees, and only where petitioners demonstrate said towers will be compatible with the surrounding area. Is that
Works for me.
kind of getting to what you want?
Works for me.
Get us there?
I guess it could,
Gets us-
yeah. uh-huh. But it doesn't, wait a minute.
Councilmember Light, just to clarify, the way the ordinance is laid out currently is there is a section, the first section you referred to, that deals with just concealed towers, which a monopole is not concealed, so it's not addressed in that section. The section that Attorney Carmen referred to is where monopole towers are allowed. And our question is, would you prefer that monopole towers aren't allowed at all and only allow the unipoles when there's deciduous trees? Because if you allow a monopole, it's still visible when the leaves fall off.
Yeah, I mean, that's my personal preference, but you say you don't think that's
I
necessary.
think we need to go with what we have, and we'll see where we are 3-6 months from now, just like we're doing with the sweepstakes and everything else. We got to give the process time to work. But to Councilmember McIntosh's point, if we go ahead and say everybody gets a slick stick, then we're going to have all of these slick sticks going up because the reception is not going to be that good. We need to just see where we are before we just change all of it and then have to come back later when people start calling us up and telling me they can't use their phone or whatever. Yeah. So I say we need to, staff has done a tremendous job.
Would you like to put that into?
I move.
Oh, wait, yes. Attorney Carmen has the piece about polling the neighborhood.
Oh, yeah, we can't do that.
Basically, that's just inconsistent with our judicial
Can't do
proceedings.
that.
Yeah.
So I just don't think you need to put that on.
Yeah, that's, okay, all right.
But it sounds like we're going to go with staff's recommendation. Is that what? Okay.
Did you make a motion?
Not yet.
Oh, okay.
Not yet. I move that we accept the revisions to the UDO with the changes that staff has put, and we will make adjustments or revisions as we move forward with the process.
Second.
Very good. Yes.
Question, wonder, Councilmember Adams, did you intend to insert in the section on page 40 where proposed towers with concealed antennae are not located within an existing stand of trees, monopine towers shall be prohibited? Did you intend to insert that?
Because Councilmember Bessie, as the attorney said, and the presenter, is already dealt with on a separate page on the monopines.
Just wanted clarification.
Yeah, monopoles, yes.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good job,
Kirk.
staff.
Yeah, and Attorney Carmen. Is there anything, we're only 6 minutes over, so, yes.
Public Works will begin in 5 minutes.
Thank you.